Go for it.
All right. So my name is Safear. I'm a Muslim and a prison abolitionist, currently incarcerated at Safear, which is a maximum security state prison in Pennsylvania. Um, some of the work that I do a little bit of writing. I'm on the editorial board for an abolitionist journal called In the Belly Journal. My writing has appeared in some modest digital platforms, Jewish Currents, Utopics, Asian American Writers Guild. At Fayette, I'm active in the Muslim community. I teach classes, I give sermons, things like that. And I also facilitate inside, outside political education correspondence study groups where we do political education with activists on the outside who are involved in different social justice and liberation based issues. Some of my most recent work is as an organizer with a group called PUMP, PUMP, Pulling Up My People. And it's a group of prisoners that are dedicated to exposing the criminal injustice system, dismantling the prison industrial complex, and also kind of giving back to the communities and trying to give communities the resources they need to stay safe. I'll do a shameless plug. You can follow that on IG at Pump
This is
Nation.
a call from Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Fayette. This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
At Pump Nation 2021. I also host a podcast called In the Mix, Prisoner Podcast, which is a prisoner-generated, prisoner-run podcast where we examine issues inside of prison from an incarcerated perspective. And that's on Twitter. You can follow that at In the Mix 2021. And yes, I do all of that from prison through 15-minute recorded calls for up to 4 calls per day through an hour. And I try to make it happen. Since I was 18 years old, I'm 31 now. I've lived under various kinds of carceral supervision, probation, parole, and I've spent the last 7 years straight locked up. All of this time in direct contact with our prison system has taught me one thing that I know with absolute certainty. Prison does not work. Well, at least not in the way we're told it's supposed to work. In America, there are over 2.2 million people incarcerated. That's like a modest-sized city. And this country, it only holds a small fraction of the world's population, about 5%. Yet, out of all the people currently incarcerated around the world, 20% of them are locked up in America. So 5% of the world's population, but 20% of all incarcerated people. And with all these people incarcerated, we got to seriously take a look and ask sometimes just simple questions. Sometimes simple questions can have the clearest answers. And one of the things that I look at when I see all of these people locked up, I want to know, has prison made our communities any safer? Like, have they made us any safer? And for those of us who don't come from, affluent, wealthy, rich, white neighborhoods, then to us the answer is simple, that prison has not made our neighborhoods any safer. Day after day, we're subjected to unimaginable levels of violence and harm. And when I do ask people inside of prison, what do they think will make our neighborhood safer? Like, what are the things that are needed to make it safer if prison isn't working? I get answers like, get rid of drugs, drug and alcohol treatment. Some people say give people good jobs, give people places to live, access to food, education, mental health treatment, youth mentorship. And what they're doing really is naming all of the things that wealthy communities already have, the resources that keep them safe. And even a prisoner can tell you that if you give our communities access to those same resources, then we would be safe too. And That's what abolition is. Abolition is to recognize that we can't solve our problems in society by simply locking everybody up. Because locking people up doesn't prevent harm. Actually, I would argue that it actually causes even more harm. It causes harm to the individual, it causes harm to the family, and it causes harm to society as a whole. In her book, Golden Gulag, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, a geographer and an abolitionist, she mentions a study. And in this study, they show that if you only remove 2 or 3 people who make, move, or care for things, 2 or 3 people from a community, that community will start to destabilize. And we're probably all familiar with the African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child. Now, let's imagine a village. And in that village, you have all different types of people playing all different types of roles. But what happens when the caregiver gets locked up? And then the financial provider gets locked up? And then what happens when you lock up the person who mediates conflict on the block? And then you start locking all these people up. What happens to that village? And then what happens to the children there? Because by removing people from society in mass, and most of those people removed from our society come from inner city neighborhoods. When we remove all of these people, we create a culture where we're all strangers to one another. And there was a time, probably like my parents' generation and grandparents, that, the block in the inner city used to be a community. There used to be love there. But now, no one really knows each other. And we don't have community anymore. We don't have a dynamic where we look out for each other and guide each other's children. We don't mediate conflict with one another. Mass incarceration has destabilized us. And for that child who loses a parent to the prison cell, or for a parent who loses a child to prison, for the wife who loses her husband, or vice versa, for anyone really that loses a loved one to incarceration, if you experience that, it destabilizes your world. Prison might be the closest someone can come to death without dying. It's social death. And for the person left in the free world, when you're left there and your loved one is snatched away from your life and incarcerated, it's almost like they died. It's a traumatic experience. But unlike death, there's never a real closure that comes with it. Because even though they're no longer there with you in person, you can't rely on them for anything, truly beneficial anymore, except when they call you, you get a 15-minute call and bang, they're resurrected in your life. And in some incomplete way, you can experience them for a moment again. And then when the call ends or the visit ends, they die again. And you're back to grieving. And you can't raise a child from a prison cell. And you can't parent a child who's in one. And incarceration, it denies us the most potent means by which someone transforms, through relationships with others, through socialization, through, learning from other people and, experiencing that bond that, humans are able to have with each other. Anyone that has lived a certain amount of years knows that things don't remain static. The unique thing about being a human being is we have the capacity to change. And sometimes that change is for the better and sometimes for the worse. We're in a constant state of change. But when you put a human being inside of a cage and you humiliate them and you isolate them from loved ones and you remove that community, you neglect their health, you make them subordinate to people, guards who rule the grounds by violence or threat of violence, then how can you expect those conditions to create a positive change? And for decades now, incarceration has existed on the myth that prison is full of a bunch of super predators. Like, there's just a bunch of maniacs running around
You
here
have 1 minute left.
trying to violently massacre each other. But that's a bunch of bull crap. And really, that's the furthest thing from the truth. And Megan, I'm going to call you right back.
All right.
The caller has hung up.
All right. We'll give him a second.
This is a prepaid collect call from an incarcerated individual at SCI Fayette. This call is not private. It will be recorded and may be monitored. If you believe this should be a private call, please hang up and follow facility instructions to register this number as a private number. To accept charges and consent to this recorded call, press 1. To refuse to thank you for using Securus. You may start the conversation now.
All right. You're back.
Okay. The truth is that prison is full of regular people. People's fathers and mothers, sons, daughters, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews. There's real people in here. Regular people. And regular people aren't all good or all bad. They're just regular. Shades of good and bad. But it's convenient to paint a binary that people in prison are bad or evil, because if prisoners are evil, then you can justify treating them like trash. If all prisoners are super predators, you can ignore that prisoners are subjected to conditions that if you treated your dog like this, you'll probably go to jail for it. Prison is a warehouse for the people the system doesn't care about. Then they call us evil, so you won't care about us either. And I'm not trying to say that all prisoners are like beacons of light for humanity. This is a microcosm of society, and just like society, we have all different kinds of people here. But that's the thing. They're people. And people have the capacity to change. And inside, there are people who want to heal the world. You know, there are people who want to do great things, but prison doesn't offer that chance for change. Prison is not a place of rehabilitation. That's a myth. Placing a dog in a cage doesn't teach it to sit or stay or roll over. And placing a human being in a cage doesn't teach them how to live in community and be a productive member of society. Conditions in prison are constantly working against you. How could being subjected to physical, emotional, and sexual abuse ever be considered something positive? How? Still, some of us in prison manage to benefit in spite of it. It's common that people say, you know, prisoners, quote unquote, needed prison to get their lives in order. I can't get down with that. First, rarely, if ever, does anyone benefit from the actual prison itself. The programming offered in prison is superficial. There does not exist consistent one-on-one counseling. The prisoner's cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't teach critical thinking or transformative approaches. Instead, it coaches an individual to accept society's hierarchy. It teaches that a prisoner should never question the system and should just submit to a future position of...
This is a call from Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Fayette. This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
...of lower middle-class life. Drug treatment inside of prison is a revolving door designed to get as many people through as quickly as possible. Mental health treatment is restricted to medication. What people benefit from in prison is having the free time to read and reflect without constantly stressing how they're going to survive from day to day. But what does that say about our society that for many of the people that end up in these places, prison is the most stable environment that they were ever offered? Prison is that environment. What does that say about what we're doing in the world? I mean, a lot of times people will ask, it's a common question that, if we don't have prisons, what will we do with all these murderers? If we don't have prisons, what are we going to do with all of these rapists, per se? And, I just to put it out there, like, I don't personally have a murder charge. I've never had a sexual offense or anything like that. But let's examine that. Let's examine, sexual offenders because they're so controversial. And I will say, like, of course, just like everybody else, I'm appalled at the idea of somebody committing a sexual offense. Like, it's horrible. That's a horrible thing. But have prisons been the answer or a viable answer to deal with
Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Fayette. This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
Sexual assault in society? Have prisons been the viable answer? And Victoria Law, she mentions in her book, Prisons Make Us Safer, and 20 Other Myths About Incarceration. She mentions that out of every 1,000 sexual assaults, only 238 of them get reported, about 25%. Out of those 238 that get reported, only 46 lead to arrest. Then out of those 46 arrests, only 9 of those people are even prosecuted. And out of those 9 prosecutions, only an average of 5 result in conviction. So what that means is out of every 1,000 sexual assaults that occur in society, only 5 people get convicted and less than 5 get prison time. Knowing this, knowing these numbers, do you think, honestly, that prison has been effective in preventing sexual assault in society? Clearly not. And even when these people do come to prison, the vast majority of them return to the streets after being subjected to even more trauma and more injury, because we know that many of the people that actually commit sexual assault have been victims themselves. And it's just further trauma that these people go through inside of these places without any rehabilitation. And the truth is, what abolition is saying is that, no abolitionist will say to you, we're just going to remove all prisons today, all jails today, and let everybody back out into society, because that won't work either. What an abolitionist is saying is that we need to look at society. We need to understand that prison and the criminal justice system as it's set up is not preventing harm. And that's the thing. It's not about prevention. Even the police, they're not about preventing. It's all about dealing with harm after it's occurred, dealing with things after they've occurred. We need to start reimagining our approach to dealing with harm in society. We need to start thinking about things that can prevent harm. We need to start thinking about things that once people have been harmed and have caused harm, what types of transformative approaches can we use that will actually make change in society? Because clearly, what we're doing now is not working. It's not working. But it's convenient for the people in power and for politicians to keep, referring back to the same old tough on crime policies, even though the tough on crime policies have not made us any safer. And abolition is interacting with the world in a way that causes the least amount of harm. How do we make the earth a safe place for everyone? what type of resources do our communities need? Like, there's this increase in gun violence that's going on right now. Everybody hears, and it reminds me of all of these things that have occurred historically. When there was an increase in the so-called drug epidemic, in the 80s, there was the tough on crime, war on drugs policy of mass incarceration, and now you see this increase in gun crime, and we want a war on guns. But we need to start examining, the average person just doesn't wake up one day and pick up a gun and, leave outside the house with it and attempt to shoot somebody. What are the conditions in place where someone would feel so desperate that they have to walk outside of their house with a pistol? What conditions are in place where people don't have these opportunities and these, other paths that they could follow, like the elite and the wealthy do in society? Because flooding our neighborhoods with police and locking everyone up isn't accomplishing what they're saying it's supposed to accomplish. And we've been taught over and over again that the police are the cure and prisons are the cure, but they haven't cured anything yet. So our main focus, it has to be the cause of oppression, the cause of poverty, the cause of racism, the systems in place which allow these oppressions to flourish. We have to focus on rectifying the foundational issues before we can traverse into the subsidiary issues. What I mean by that is, instead of just trying to alleviate the symptoms, we have to focus on curing the disease. And before you spoke to me, when you heard I was a prisoner, me having that label of a prisoner, this stereotype and these myths that we've been indoctrinated come in your head over and over and over again. And rarely do you hear the word prisoner and do you think of anything positive. Rarely do you hear that. But the truth is that people in here have a lot of potential and things to offer back to society, things that can be done out there. And we need to start again, just kind of rethinking that. Like, personally, my whole life, I've been criminalized over my use of drugs. That has been what's harmed me my entire life, has been the criminal justice system's reaction to drugs. And for people that think that prison is about rehabilitation or the criminal justice system is concerned with it, that's not the truth. When I was 18 years old, I was actually in a rehab in Florida. I had about 2 months in this rehab, 90-day program. It was a beautiful place. I was learning a lot, all these things. I had an open court case for a robbery. And when my lawyer told the judge that I was in rehab in Florida, the judge wasn't trying to hear any of that. And instead, the judge made me come back up to Philly and go to court and sentence me to 3 to 10 years in prison. And then I was taken out of a rehabilitative setting and put in a place of trauma and violence. And even my mom to this day, my mom is probably somebody that you can be considered conservative and everything like that. And it still baffles her that this judge all these years ago did this, and it had no positive effect on me. I benefited in spite of prison, and it's been hard on my family. It's been, my siblings, they grew up without a brother. My mom, she's getting older without a son. My father's getting older without a son. And the truth is, after 7 years in prison, they really don't even know me anymore. They don't know me. And there's this distance and there's this gap, which has really harmed all of us. And, my biggest thing is, I don't want to see anybody else have to deal with these conditions that I went through, because most of the people that come in here and get put through this type of trauma, they don't come out well. They don't come out well. It's not conducive to rehabilitation. And I will say that's a big reason, why a bunch of prisoners here got together and decided to start this group that we call PUMP, Pulling Up My People. Basically, we wanted to use our experience, with these systems, our experience of being in the street, and try to flip this stereotype of this super predator myth and show the world and the community that there's actually people in the world that are trying to do a tremendous amount of harm out there, whether it's to the environment, whether it's, through various types of oppression, but we actually want to do something good. And we're having an in-person event in Philly. Y'all should come out here in the city. It's October 17th, and you'll see it on the Instagram.
You have 1 minute left.
And I'll call back Megan if maybe if there's any follow-up questions or anything like that.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
All right.
The caller has hung up.
So if you have any questions, any thoughts, any comments, he's gonna call back, and then you'll be able to interact with him. So just think anything you want to say, anything that you want to ask.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from an incarcerated individual at SCI Fayette. This call is not private. It will be recorded and may be monitored. If you believe this should be a private call, please hang up and follow facility instructions to register this number as a private number. To accept charges and consent to this recorded call, press 1. To refuse charge, thank you for using Securus. You may start the conversation now.
Hello.
Yes. All right. So does anyone who has a question, a comment, please feel free to just unmute yourself and ask away.
I have a question and probably comments too.
Safear, can you hear her?
Yep, I can hear.
All right, perfect.
Okay, cool. So I actually have a pen pal that's at Fayette right now as well, and I was just wondering if, like, for people that aren't in touch with like an abolitionist community, or like folks that are incarcerated, like if you could speak a little bit to how much like communication affects your relationships with the outside world, because I think prison was designed specifically to cut off communication and to isolate people, and it seems like even the most basic form of communication can do a lot of good for people on the inside, but also like how that affects your relationships with your families as well.
Sure. That's a book in and of itself to answer that. Trying to be brief though is you really already said it, that prison is designed to disrupt communication. So from one angle, they try to promote that they're about rehabilitation, but we know through studies that the most effective form of rehabilitation is through contact with loved ones and creating a support system with positive people on the outside. So even though they claim that they are about this, everything that they actually do in policy restricts that. So, me being somebody who, a few years ago, me myself was not in contact with, abolitionists and people on the street, it's a big hurdle to overcome. It's a tremendous hurdle. You'll never really have the same type of relationship you would have with somebody on the street through prison communication. I mean, it's just not possible. But there are people and groups on the street for people that don't have support systems, where, you can reach out to these people for pen pals, as you mentioned, right? For pen pals and different ways to communicate. Like, on a personal level, yes, about my family, and dealing with my family, you see how our calls are right now. These are 15-minute increments, and we get 4 of them a day. That means that how am I supposed to contact my mother, my father, all of my little sisters, my loved ones in a day period. And then on top of that, how am I supposed to make a call out to, a positive event like this? Or how am I supposed to do any of those things? But prison is not designed to promote those things. So these are battles that have to take place with help from people that are on the outside that recognize the hypocrisy of the system and working together with prisoners to directly confront that and develop more potent means of communication. So that's something that has to be worked on, no doubt.
Other questions or thoughts?
Say it again.
I was asking the class if anybody else
This
has
is a
other
call from
questions or thoughts.
Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Fayette. This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
I was seeing if anybody, if there's additional questions or thoughts.
I have a question. I also just want to thank you for joining us and spending your calls with our class. But yeah, I liked a lot of what you said, and I'm also wondering, it sounds like you're doing a lot for prison abolition and also just fighting the larger systems of all of this. And I'm wondering, maybe a very difficult question to ask, in that environment and just in general, but how it's perceived, how your work is perceived on the inside, and how you manage to navigate this impossible system while being in the mix of it at the same time.
Yeah. Well, as far as inside with prisoners, it's in a positive light, because one of the things that we're trying to shake out of is this mindset of individualism and create community even while we're in here, and collectivism. So we do that through practice, right? Through sharing our resources, through helping each other get in contact with different individuals on the street who are doing similar work, and like I said, one of the things that I do is help facilitate political education correspondence study groups. And we link a prisoner with an outside activist, and then the group of us all cover issues, ranging from prison abolition to, all sorts of things, all sorts of liberation type of issues. So we're trying to connect each other. So from the prison population itself, it's a positive thing, and people that get on board.
Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Fayette. This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
You find that they start practicing those same things. It's been very transformative. As far as the prison itself, it's interesting, right? Because I was speaking to my mother the other day, and I was telling her about some of the recent work that I'm doing, and she was just saying how she's so proud of me, all that kind of stuff. And it was difficult to explain to her that for all the things that she's proud of me for, I can't actually go into the parole board and telling them that I'm doing all of this stuff, because they would consider it to be something negative. And I think that forces us to look at how the system is set up. Is it really that they want people to rehabilitate and transform, or not? Because all of these things, would be considered positive to the average person, is considered subversive and definitely contrary to what the DOC wants us doing. It's very difficult to navigate, and because of that, I can't go into detail.
Yeah, thank you so much. And what was the thing on October 17th you were going to talk about?
Okay, so we're having an in-person event. Pump is pulling up my people. We're having an in-person event. You can go on Instagram. It's Pump Nation 2021. There's all the information on there, some videos of those of us who are working on it. And basically, it's to highlight the injustice of the criminal system. We're also fundraising for a wrongfully convicted friend of ours who needs legal assistance. We got a bunch of groups coming out that do prisoner work, like CADV, HRC, Philly Bail Fund, Allegheny's Abolition, and Amistad Law Project, Free Them to Heal Us. So there's going to be food, and there's local Philly businesses coming out setting up tables that have merchandise and speakers, and it's supposed to be real live. So check it out if you're in Philly. October 17th.
Anyone else?
Hi, it's Joseph. First, I just want to thank you again for taking your time, like Emily was saying, to talking to us today. I know I really appreciate it. I guess my question is about re-entry, and specifically when it relates to your family. And I would imagine that there are some difficulties kind of getting reconnected with your family, and I was hoping that you could just talk a little bit about that, maybe concerns that you had or experiences, just being locked up for extended period of time and then having to try to reconnect with everyone again and reestablish those relationship and kind of what that's like.
Sure. So it's nerve-wracking. Me personally, I've been incarcerated the past 7 years. I have 16 months left until my minimum. So for me, it's far enough away where it's difficult to plan in detail, but close enough that it keeps me up at night stressing. And there is this dynamic where I've grown in various different ways, and so has my family, but we haven't grown together. So our basic functioning relationship is still stagnated as it was 7 years ago. And in some ways, because a lot of my relationship, say with my mother, has grown to be positive, I see a lot of those old relationship dynamics pop up from occasion to occasion. And I worry about, say, paroling to her home and then now re-entering that environment under those dynamics. So it is nerve-wracking to think about that. It makes me consider going to somewhere else if I have that ability. I mean, the positive thing for me is I've built a lot of amazing relationships with people that do prisoner work on the street, and real friendships and real bonds with people. So my support system has grown. And I worry about going back to Philly. I'm from Philly. I did a lot of dirt in Philly. And just because I've grown and I've moved past a lot of things doesn't mean my past has. Meaning it doesn't mean the people that, I might have problems with out there have grown past that. And because of that, I thought about relocating in order to just kind of get a fresh start and not go back into that environment. Because I might roll up to Wawa and, may see somebody that I had a problem with 10 years ago and they didn't forget about it. So there is, it's a scary thought that comes with that. I've had the experience before being locked up for a shorter amount of time, 2 years, but even in that, and then going home. But even in that 2-year period, I'll tell you what, I was pretty institutionalized, and I remember how uncomfortable it felt leaving. And I went to King of Prussia Mall, and when I went in the mall, there's just all these people everywhere around me, all these different smells and colors, and I was having like a headache, and I had a lot of anxiety, and I was sweating. And then I go into the Foot Locker, and in prison you get this limited choice of shoes you can buy. I go in Foot Locker, and there's like hundreds of shoes on the wall, and my folks are like, pick 2 pairs out. And before I know it, I'm like pacing back and forth along this wall of shoes because I could not decide what I wanted to buy. And that was for only 2 years incarcerated, and I spent 7 years incarcerated. And the entire world has changed with social media and, just everything. There's a lot of people in here right now that are on our Instagram. If you go on there, they got videos from video visits on the Instagram, but they've never actually used Instagram before. They have no idea how it functions. They don't know what it looks like. So I feel like there has to be a more diligent effort made by organizations on the outside that are preparing people to enter back into society and giving people, a structure or a support for when they get out. Because there are some, but they're not fully comprehensive, and it's definitely a need for it. And I thank you for thanking me. I appreciate y'all just listening to me and you know what I mean, and being positive. And I was kind of hoping that somebody would disagree with the things that I said and would speak up on it. I like to hear the disagreements too. For one or two of you who, you know what I mean, I know disagree with me. They're saying that, but it's okay.
You're also in good company though, because we're social workers. So
That's a good point.
that's not to say that nobody in the room disagrees, but like there's a lot of different types of thinking and approaches with social work too.
True, true. You know, and it's one of the things I think about in here is like, you know, when say even for like college, when somebody goes to college, you know, in college, one of the main things that they teach is critical thinking, how to really examine, you know, structures in society and, you know, look at things from an.
You have 1 minute left.
But that's not what rehabilitation in prison teaches you. It teaches you just conformity, and to conform to what they want you to conform with. So I have a minute left. Megan, thank you so much for having me.
Thank
Anything you ever
you.
need, I got you. So
We
and thank
appreciate
all
you.
y'all. Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. All right, talk soon.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
The caller has hung up.
All right. So I was thinking that I can break you into breakout rooms to process thoughts, feelings, and then we'll take a break at 7 and then we can talk as a larger group. Does that work for you all?
Oh, yeah, that's good.
All right. So I'm going to put you in four breakout rooms. And I'm going to open them.
Hey, Dr. Megan, sorry, my laptop, I accidentally closed it when I was moving, so it literally kicked me out right when you were putting the breakout rooms.
All right, no problem.